The Rio Grande Southern Railroad built 7 of them in the 1930s, and they became known as Galloping Geese. With their gasoline-powered motors, they offered the railroad a cost-effective way to carry mail, some freight, and later passenger traffic. 3 of the remaining 6 geese are now at the Colorado Railroad Museum in Golden, Colorado.
We have 3 of them. We have number 2, 6, and 7. Number 7 was built in 1936 out of a 26 Purcell 7-passenger limousine. In 31, the railroad was almost in bankruptcy. The only thing that kept them going was the mail contract. To keep the mail contract, they had to run a train every day almost. So they just couldn't, they didn't have enough freight or passenger traffic to afford to run a steam locomotive every day. So they had to do something. So they crew in Ridgeway, that's where Rio Grande Southern headquarters were. They took first one was they took a 24 Buick, chopped the back out of it, put some steel wheels on it, and put it on the tracks.
The Galloping Geese ran from Dolores, Colorado, up to Ridgeway, and also from Dolores around to Durango, Colorado. So they serviced the mail of all those mining towns in there, Rico, Stoner, and Telluride, and then again back into Ridgeway. So they would turn it around and come back the other way and pick up a sack of mail, a few passengers, and a little bit of freight.
The geese allowed the failing railroad to stay in business during the Depression in the 1930s.
Well, it worked very well, except the post office didn't like them carrying the mail in the back in the open. And if they had more than one passenger, they had to sit on mail. They didn't like that. So they turned around and built number 2, which is right behind us up on the hill. It had a bigger box in the back, and they could actually put 3 passengers in, 3 or 4 passengers in that, depending on how closey they were. And that worked fantastically. And also in 31, they built Goose number 3, which originally looked just like number 7 does. And that was fantastic. It paid for itself in a few weeks. And so they ended up building 4 big geese. And in 33, they took and scrapped number 1. They used parts of it to build number 6, which we do have on the property. There is a reproduction of number 1 in Ridgeway, Colorado, at the museum there in Ridgeway. And it actually saved the railroad. It kept the railroad running in the red, or in the black rather, for 21 years.
And they called it a Galloping Goose because the Rio Grande Southern Railroad tracks weren't very even. And it waddled down the tracks, and when they blew the horn, it sounded kind of like a goose. So originally it was sort of a derisive title, but then it became a term of endearment later.
In 49, they lost the mail contract. That's when they put the windows in the back of the 4 big geese. And at that time in 1949 and 50, Denver was getting rid of the trolleys. So they bought a whole bunch of trolley seats, put those in the back of the geese. When they started doing the excursions, they tried that for 2 years, 50, 51. And that wasn't enough to make a go of it, so 51, 52, they sold everything off, tore the tracks up, and abandoned the railroad.
The geese were powered by automobile and truck engines and ran on gasoline.
It's very expensive to run a steam locomotive and very labor intensive. And gasoline, get in, turn the key, and you're ready to go.
Goose number 7 is driven like a car with a manual transmission, with no steering wheel, of course, and air brakes.
There's no steering wheel and no brake pedal. Number 7 was the first one that they built, and they put air brakes on it. That was a 10-year-old car when they bought it. And we don't know if the Purcell engine was shot or whatever, but they put a 36 Ford V8 flathead in it. They ran that till 1946, and that's when they bought 4 war surplus GMC truck engines. And they were an oddball engine. We don't know what they were used in as far as the military go. Everybody says they were deuce and a halves, but they're not. And they put that in the 4 big geese. And if you look at the goose, you'll see that the larger geese have a little Chinaman's hat over the hood. That was because the air filter on those GMC engines stuck up too high.
On the goose ride, we'll take you for a tour of the grounds. You'll be transported back in time because the loop of track that we have is so prototypical of what it was like to travel in the mountains of Colorado.
I happened to be fishing on the Dolores River with my uncle back in the late 40s and watched one of the geese go up the tracks. Never got to ride it then, but now I get to drive it.